Up until now, I've always been faced with choosing between using a DX camera, which has all the pixels crammed in the middle. That's perfect for when I'd have to crop an image. Or using something like the 5DSR, which has 50 megapixels but spread across the wider frame and being kind of slower. This gives me the best of both worlds. I can crop the image in camera down to 20 megapixels in the middle. And the camera even blocks out the outside of the viewfinder, showing me exactly what it's capturing, but it still lets me see the edges of the frame, which makes it easier to find the birds in focus. And that's a kind of practical advantage that will let you get pictures instead of missing pictures. So it's giving me the pixel density of the Nikon D500, but the wider angle of view of the full frame camera with no compromises. It's amazing. And those autofocus points cover the whole width of the frame when I'm in DX mode. I love it.
There are a couple hundred swallows out there.
The D850 is good for wildlife videography in that you can put on big, huge lenses like they have them, and it's pretty good at autofocusing, so you can quickly get that bird in focus, and you can go into DX mode and crop 1.5 times. That's all great. The biggest challenge I have is that you have to use the rear screen here. The viewfinder is always black when you're recording, and it's really tough to find things in the viewfinder, and you can't stabilize the camera against your face. So you pretty much have to be on a tripod, and it's hard to acquire the subject in the frame if they're moving quickly. So I'd probably still rather have a mirrorless camera for filming wildlife. In particular, the EM1 Mark II from Olympus or the Panasonic GH5 have been great.
Ooh, I like the little thumbstick. So I'm going through my photos to see which ones I like, and then if you press FN2, suddenly you have a rate button, which is really nice for wildlife photos because you take so many. It's good to mark the ones that you like while you're shooting.
We're going to spend more time with it, so subscribe to see the full review. But right now, it seems like the D850 is like the best wildlife camera ever made. It's fantastic. 45 megapixels, no AA filter, and the huge selection of Nikon lenses just mean you're going to get the best possible image quality. But it goes beyond that. I mean, when we eventually get our grip in, we don't have it yet, it'll be able to shoot 9 frames a second. The focusing system is astounding. It's basically the best we've ever used, in really close competition with the Sony A9. The touchscreen is incredibly useful just for making sure that you got the shot. You can zoom right in, make sure that everything is nice and tight, and if you got the shot, you get to go home. Buffer stats on the D850, we tested it at 37 14-bit losslessly compressed RAW frames before it started slowing down. And especially when writing to the XQD card, it doesn't slow down that much. It slows down a little. And every real wildlife photographer has been shooting a bird flying towards you, and you know the pictures get better and better as they get closer and closer, and then inevitably as it starts to get really close you run out of buffer and your camera's like tick, 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 and slows way down, and it's just heartbreaking that you missed the best possible shot because you didn't like budget your buffer well enough. The D810 on the other hand only got about 30 frames, and the 5DSR here only gets about 14. If you shoot in DX mode with RAW, if you shoot JPEG, the D850 essentially has an unlimited buffer. It will stop after 200 frames, which is something that's built into the camera to just stop you from burning out the shutter when you're accidentally pushing it down. Comparing the D850 to a D810, if you're thinking about upgrading, well, it has about 25% more pixels, which depending on the scenario could get you anywhere from 10% more detail to about 20% more detail, which is a pretty big win. That's like the difference between jumping from a 400 millimeter lens to a 500 or 600 millimeter lens. It's getting you that much closer essentially, which is a constant struggle. The actual pixel level is about the same for the D500 in those scenarios where you're cropping. So if somehow you can fill the frame with the bird, then the D850 will get you more than twice the number of pixels than the $2,000 or $1,900 D500, in which case your images will be far, far more detailed. But I never hear any APS-C wildlife photographers complaining about how they got too close to birds, how they couldn't get back far enough, because that's not a problem. Because even if you're shooting APS-C, you probably end up cropping most of your wildlife photos anyway. Therefore, if you're cropping anyway, you could use them interchangeably and get about the same image quality. As I mentioned earlier, the D850's advantage is that it gives you a full frame view even when taking DX pictures, which makes it that much easier to find and track moving wildlife and an extremely long telephoto lens. And in those scenarios where maybe you've set up a blind, maybe you're using extension tubes on your big telephoto lens to get really close to the wildlife and you can fill the frame, then you can actually take advantage of all those 45 megapixels. And that does happen. And for me, it's probably in 10 to 15% of my wildlife shots where I am actually able to get that close. But still, those are the shots that might end up in your portfolio, so it really can make a big difference. So we've been recommending the D500 to all wildlife photographers, and now we'll continue to recommend the D500 to everybody who doesn't have basically a 5-figure budget. But at twice the price, once you count the grip and the battery to get up to 9 frames a second, the D850 is more versatile, definitely. But the wildlife pictures for most people aren't going to be worth the extra money. You'd probably be happier spending that extra $1,900 on better glass, or maybe a trip to a safari or someplace where you could get better wildlife pictures. There are better ways to spend your money. Compared to the Canon 5 DSR here, which is what I've been using for up-close wildlife work, it's 50 megapixels with no anti-aliasing filter and all that awesome Canon glass. It's really tight. Like, the Canon has 10% more pixels, so maybe it would have a little bit more detail in some perfect scenario where atmospheric conditions were perfect and hand-holding was perfect and the lens was perfect, but realistically I'm not seeing any difference in sharpness when comparing those two. I am noticing the better dynamic range of the D850, especially when shooting at low ISOs, and that really helps. That's allowed me to really pull up the details in eyes that were otherwise just completely black. And that can make a real tangible difference in your pictures. Now, I can recover the dynamic range in the Canon too, but recovered shadows end up looking much less detailed. We're going to be shooting portraits, landscapes, travel, every other type of photography with it. Subscribe to see those follow-up videos. Ask any follow-up questions in the comments down below, including things you want to see in those follow-up videos. Give me a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you see when we release a new video. Thanks.